An unusual day in Congress, to be sure. House Republicans started this new year with the parliamentary debacle that everyone who follows anything has seen on Tuesday. If you're not a C-SPAN person or you're not a news person, this is the kind of story that we've seen break through on the internet, on the comedy shows, all over the place, because the Republicans took their new majority and immediately exposed their rifts. They failed to select a Speaker of the House. We know that. That's the first job of Congress on day one. They failed to also make progress on negotiations to get out of this morass. There's now been 6 votes with Republicans failing to pick a speaker, including 3 more rounds of defeats for Kevin McCarthy today. This process and those reruns and the very public, sometimes humiliating political march to defeat for McCarthy has drawn talk of everything from Groundhog Day to calls for somebody out there, some important Republican, to start leveling with McCarthy that, according to some, he cannot win and needs to leave.
Well, it's Groundhog Day. Again.
Sure, it looks messy, but democracy is messy.
Do you think that the American people support the status quo?
The root issue is this: they do not trust Kevin McCarthy. There is no frustration on our side. We are focused on serving the American people.
Washington is completely broken.
The president needs to tell Kevin McCarthy that, sir, you do not have the votes and it's time to withdraw.
A speaker has not been elected.
The House is not in order.
Well, one of those things is certainly true. The Speaker has not been elected. What you see here is what it looks like when the House is adjourned. The acrimony, the frustration has continued into this evening. We are told they will try to come back into session at 8 p.m. or so. Now, let's be clear about the math. Whatever one thinks of the hardliners upending the Republican Party right now, and Nicole and I were just discussing some of their deficiencies, I always level with you about the truth of what's happening right now. They have done more than make their point in these 2 days. The first time in a century the House has failed to pick a speaker on ballot number 1 is because of them. They have also grown their numbers from that original 5 that they were publicly threatening to 20. They have taken a party leader who was literally publicly moving boxes of belongings into the Speaker's office. That's Monday, what you're looking at on your screen, and that was public. A show of confidence, or what now looks like overconfidence. They took him and his position, and they defenestrated him. To paraphrase Jack Harlow, apparently these guys like speakers more down to earth, so don't be stuck up. They don't take L's, they give them out and chuck them up. Well, again, whatever you think of these folks, these now 20 hardline defectors have given McCarthy his L's or losses, 6 of them, and counting into tonight. The defectors also have moved, I should say, towards a kind of a process. I don't think anyone thinks that they are super cooperative or conciliatory or even realistic. But they are playing ball, pushing stalking horse candidates to reflect their opposition to McCarthy. Those folks are now part of these high-profile, closed-door, secretive negotiations over what they're going to do with the debacle that these 20 people has served up the party and the Congress. So now we have 2-term Congressman Byron Donalds from Florida, who's drawing about 20 votes today and backing from the Conservative Freedom Caucus. So that's what these hardline defectors are doing. That is a type of impact. It is a type of result. And they are giving losses out, although they are losses that affect their own party and the Congress. I say that by way of reporting because that's part of why this matters. That's part of why so many people are now watching the Congress going, how long is this going to last? What are we going to get out of it? But let me be clear on one final point before I bring in our Hill reporters and our experts. Making other people lose doesn't always mean you're winning, even in zero-sum politics. These 20 Republican defectors have now marked the Republican Party's new rule as a time of chaos, of infighting, of power games with scant reference to the policies they ran on or the people they claim to serve. And that part I want to underscore. Yes, it's politics. Yes, you can say there's a lot of machinations. And you can say you have low expectations for politicians. That's fine. But as we go through this now, possibly into here another night, another third day or more, think about how infrequently you've heard any of these folks really lay out a policy concession they want, or something to do with inflation, or something to do with foreign policy or funding. We don't hear about that, and McCarthy wasn't really pressed on that stuff because they admit it. They're not even doing this for those reasons. So that is something very different than many of the other precedents. And as Nicole and I were just discussing, it is something very disturbing if you look at democracy as a means of public service on behalf of the people. As promised, I now bring in Governor and former chair of the Democratic Party, Howard Dean, and David Frum, now a writer for The Atlantic. He worked in senior positions in the Bush White House. Welcome to both of you. Howard, what do you see here?
I see a total collapse of the Republican Party, which was perfectly obvious when Trump became president 5 years ago or 6 years ago. They just can't get their act together. They're mostly interested in themselves and not interested in the country. Now, so two things can happen. One, I think Scalise would be a reasonable alternative. I don't think he's reasonable, but I think he might be a compromise candidate because I don't think McCarthy can win at this point. And second, what could happen, which I really worry about, is that McCarthy wins or some other person who has no core, as Joe Walsh put it last night on a talk show I was on, wins, and then the debt ceiling collapses because nobody can get these people to vote for the debt ceiling. So the last hope I have is there are 3 or 4 or 5 Republicans who want to do the right thing for the country. And that could result in some incredibly interesting things because it's not beyond the pale to have a Democratic speaker out of all this. I think it's unlikely, but it's not impossible.
David?
Ari, you used the phrase "not in 100 years." So one of the things I did today was I went back and looked at the speaker fight in 1923. What happened? What was that all about? So the Republicans had a huge majority in the House in the 1920s, but there was a split. There were Republicans from urban industrial states who had most of the power, and Republicans from farm states who had less of the power, and they had a disagreement. There were things the farm state Republicans wanted that the urban industrial Republicans could give. The farm state Republicans inflicted pain on the urban industrial Republicans over 3 days to make their point. And the deadlock was broke when on the third day, the urban industrial Republicans said to the farm Republicans, okay, we'll give you some of the things you want. And a deal was done and a speaker was elected. That all takes place against the background of there being things you want. But what if there's nothing you want? What happens if you say to the hostage taker, why did you take the hostage? What can we give you to redeem the hostage? And the hostage taker says, I like having hostages.
Yeah.
Nothing. I like having the hostage. I collect hostages. Yeah. That's what I do. I'm a hostage collector. Well, it's hard to negotiate with that person, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, David, to extend your analogy, and by the way, if they ever need bookings on the news to cover the 1923 issues, I think you're ready. So we got you in more than one century. But
I wasn't ready yesterday, but I'm ready today.
But to your point, you know, we have turned to Batman before on this program, and I will again. I mean, Alfred, in his wisdom, says to Batman, well, perhaps, Mr. Wayne, you picked a battle with someone you don't fully understand. Some men don't have goals and objectives. Some men just want to watch the world burn. I know Howard prefers the Wu-Tang Clan quotes, but sometimes we quote films, David. And if they want to watch the world burn and they get to do that day after day, then how do you explain what Ali Vitale was just reporting, that the McCarthy wing is saying, well, we'll just keep on voting? Where do we go from here then?
Well, I think that there is a division. It's not a division over things you want. It's not a division over things you can negotiate, but there is a division. McCarthy, like Mitch McConnell, like most of the congressional Republicans, House and Senate, understands the Republican Party had a very bad election in 2022. Very bad, up and down the ballot, bad in the Senate, bad in the House. They lost 2 governorships. They lost 4 state legislative chambers. That last is unheard of in an off-year election. It was a bad, bad election for the Republicans. And there are people who say, look, we don't like it, but we're prepared to adjust to that reality and to think about it. And then there are people who say, what reality? And they put their fingers in their ears and say, yeah, I can't hear you. And Kevin McCarthy is now dealing with people who are saying, our position on the 2022 election is fingers and ears, yeah, I can't hear you. And so you're dealing with people's psychic needs, not their political needs.
You know, I want to give Howard a chance to respond. Also, he's from a proverbial farm state. So, you know, he may have more than one issue to weigh in on. But let me tee up one other piece that we've been watching, which is you had The C-SPAN cameras are usually fixed, but we've been getting more views of the floor. So if you're a super nerd like some of us, that's interesting. We've got this footage here of AOC deep in conversation with someone that she rarely has much to talk about. That's Matt Gaetz, part of this early and effective defector group. And AOC has relayed that Gaetz was actually wondering, kind of fact-checking, according to her, a claim that he said McCarthy made, that maybe Democrats would help him get the speakership if the standoff continued. And AOC has relayed, quote, McCarthy was suggesting he could get Dems to walk away to lower his threshold, meaning he could win without the 5 or whatnot. I fact-checked and said absolutely not. She explained this further with our colleague in an interview with MSNBC's Alex Wagner.
Sometimes the leadership of your party, in this case the Republican Party, will be making claims in order to try to twist arms and get people in line. And a lot of times information and truth is currency. So sometimes to be able to fact check some of the claims that McCarthy is making, whether Democrats are going to defect or not, et cetera, is important in order to keep him honest and to keep people honest in general.
Pretty interesting, Howard. It actually overlaps with the point you raised, which is a lot of this gets fluid when you get into the unprecedented corners because it's not one number. It's the majority of those voting. So strange alliances can emerge, especially if the numbers start shifting. Her main point there was that she was willing or perhaps happy to say that the Democrats weren't going to do anything to help Kevin McCarthy. And if he were claiming that, he was bluffing. I'm curious your view on all the above, Howard.
I think that's probably true. I think McCarthy's bluffing. The reason the Democrats aren't going to do anything to help Kevin McCarthy is Kevin McCarthy is fundamentally going to be a bad speaker if he gets elected. As Joe Walsh said the other night, he was a very conservative Republican talk show host and a former congressman. McCarthy has no core.